All right, so in this project, I want to get into a little bit of drag and drop functionality. So we're going to just create these boxes, style these boxes. We're going to have one div inside one of these boxes that has a background image coming from Unsplash, just a random image. And you'll see if I grab it, a couple things happen. The image I'm holding has a class of hold, which gives it a gray border, which you can't really see. It's very faint, but it has a border. And then each one of these boxes I hover over gets a class of hovered, which gets a dark background, and a white dash border. And then if I drop, it'll actually go in whichever of these I'm hovering over. All right, so it's a very simple project, but it gives you a basic understanding of how drag and drop works, and you can then go on to build some really cool interfaces or even games and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and jump in and get started. All right, so we're going to get started on our drag and drop project. So I have my project starter open. I'm going to just change this to drag and drop. And the HTML is going to be really simple. We're basically just going to have a bunch of boxes with the class of empty. So let's say class empty, and we want 5 of these. So we'll say times 5. And the first one here, I want to have the image that we can drag and drop. So inside this div, I'm going to have a class of fill. And we also want to add an attribute here of draggable. Okay, because we want this to be draggable within the browser. So we want to set draggable equal to true. And that's it. That's all we need for our HTML. So now let's jump into our style sheet and we'll start to create this. So we actually don't need any font because there's no text. So I'm just going to get rid of that. For the flex direction, I'm not going to use a column unless it's on smaller screens. So what I'll do is get rid of the flex direction column, but just create a media query down here. So we'll say if it's a max width of 800 pixels, so if it's under 800 pixels, then on the body we want the flex direction to be a column. Okay, and then in the body, the only other thing I'm going to do here is add a background color of steel blue. All right, so now we want to style the boxes with the class of empty. So let's say class empty. And I'm going to, actually we don't need a display here. Let's do a height of 150 pixels and a width of 150 pixels. And we'll do a margin of 10 pixels. And I'm going to have a border solid 3 pixels and black. And let's give it a background of white. Okay, so there's our boxes. Those are our empty boxes. Now, when we have our image here, actually let's do the fill class. So under empty, we'll have our fill class, and we're going to have a background image here. And I'm going to use an Unsplash random image, so it'll be a different image every time. So for the URL, it's HTTPS, and it's going to be source.unsplash.com, and then /random, and then you can do a size. So I'm going to do /150 x 150. So it'll be 150 by 150. I'm going to set the height of that to 145 pixels. And let's set, whoops, I forgot my semicolon. And let's set the width to 145 pixels, and let's set the cursor to a pointer. And now if I save that, you'll see we have a random image, and it's going to be a different image every time. And I'm able to drag this. You can see that if I don't have this, if I set this to false, and now you see I can't actually pick it up and drag it. So you want to make sure that that attribute is always set to true if you're using drag and drop. Now we want to have some specific styles when we're dragging it. So for instance, when I click and I hold and I'm dragging it, I want it to have a border, like a grayish white border around it. So I'm going to have a class here of hold, and we'll say border. We'll set that to solid. Let's do 5 pixels CCC, Now that's not going to be applied, but when we get to our JavaScript, when we have that event where we're holding it, we want it to add the border. I can add it manually. If I go over here and I say hold, now you can see there's that gray border around it, but I only want it when I'm actually holding it. And then I also want to style these boxes if we hover over. So if I take this and I hover over a box, I want it to have a dark background and also have a dashed border around it. So let's have a class called hovered. So you just need to figure out the styles of the different states of the drag events, because there's multiple drag events that we can use. So we're going to set the background color of this to 333 if it has the class of hovered. And let's also say border color, we'll set that to white, and we'll set the border style, we'll set that to dashed. Oops, keep forgetting my semicolons. Border white, we don't need that. Okay, so this isn't going to show just yet because we need to apply that with the JavaScript. So in the next video, we'll jump into our script.js and we'll start to add all of our different drag events. Okay, so now we want to fire off specific events at certain times during the whole drag process. So first thing I'm going to do is create our drag functions. I'm going to do that down here. So the first one is drag start, and that does exactly what it says. As soon as you pick something up and you start to drag it, this will fire off. And for now, I'm just going to do a console log for all of these and just say what they do. So let's drag start, and then I guess we'll just copy this down a few times. So we have drag start, we also have drag end, and you can check out these events in the MDN docs too, but you'll see exactly when they fire off. So we have drag end, we have drag over, so when we drag over something, drag enter, and drag leave, so we can enter and leave. And we also have drag drop for when we drop. All right, and then we'll just change this text here, say drag drop. This one is leave. This one is enter, and this one over and end. All right, so when do we want to fire these off? Well, we need to bring in our, what we need to drag, which is the fill class, and then all of these empty boxes, which there's multiple of, right? So we need to use query selector all for those. So let's first grab our fill, which is only one of, so we'll say document.query selector, and that has a class of fill. And then we also want all the class of empty. There's more than one, so we want to do query selector all. We'll call this empties. And let's do for fill, we have two events that we want to fire off, and two of these functions, drag start and drag end. So that applies to the fill, to this image that I'm actually dragging. So let's add an event listener onto this. And I named the functions the same as the events, only the events are all lowercase. So you want to do drag start, all lowercase. That's the event name. And then we're going to call drag start like that. And we're going to do the same with drag end. So make sure the second one has the camel case because that's the function. And this is going to be drag end, all lowercase. All right. So let's go ahead and open up the console here. I'm going to put this at the bottom. And this kind of messes up like the sizing of this. But I don't know, that's fine, I guess, because it'll still pop in there. So I'm going to click this, and notice as soon as I pick it up, we get drag start. And then when I let go, I get drag end, drag start, drag end. So we know that that's firing off. So we know these functions are running. Now, the rest of the functions here are going to go on the empty boxes. All right, so I'm going to, there's a couple ways we could do this. We could use for each. We've been doing that quite a bit throughout the course, so we're going to use a for loop here, because we can do this as well, and we'll say for const empty of empty. So this is a for of loop. This should be empties, because remember, this is a node list, which is basically an array, and we're just saying for each empty of the empties array. Then what do we want to do? We want to use that empty variable, and we want to add an event listener. So this is going to be for drag over, and that's going to call the function drag over. And we want 4 of these. So this next one here is going to be drag enter. Drag enter. We have drag leave. Drag leave. Now the last one is a little different than the rest, because all the other events start with drag. This one is just drop. So we don't want drag drop here, we just want drop, but I did call the function drag drop, so let's say drag drop. All right, so now let's save that, and now I'm going to grab this. You can see drag over is just keeps firing off, and as long as we're moving over something, it just keeps firing off. And you can see drag enter, drag leave. Okay, so enter and leave just will run once, like enter when we enter this box here, and then when I leave it calls drag leave. But when I'm going anywhere over it, it calls drag over. So hopefully you can see, you know, when these events are firing off. Now as far as these events down here, we'll start with drag start, which is on the fill element, right? It's on this right here, which is the image, has the background image. So what I want to do with that first is add the class name of hold. So I'm going to say this dot class name, and this we can just assign a class, or we can append a class. In this case, we want to append the class of hold. We still want it to have the class of fill. So plus equal will append, and then we just want to put space and then hold. All right, as soon as I do that, when I grab this, you'll see it has the border around it, both the one I'm holding and that image. Now as soon as I pull it out of the box, I want the box to clear up. So what I'll do is we'll say this dot class name, and we want to just reassign it. We can leave it empty, or we can just put a class of invisible. I know we don't have any styles for that, but we can set it to invisible. But if I go over here and I click, what happens is I don't even have time to grab it and to add hold. This happens like at the same time, and invisible gets applied. In fact, if I look down here, you'll see that it has a class of invisible. Fill is gone, hold is gone. If I do it real quick, let's just open this up so you can see it has a class of fill, and as soon as I click, I don't have any time to basically grab it. So we can just add a set timeout, which takes in a function, and what I want to add is this right here. And we can even put 0. We don't have to put anything above 0 here. It'll just make it so that this happens first, right? So if I go over here now, I can grab it and pull it out, okay? And then that box then turns white. Now as far as our event listeners down here, our functions, I'm going to start with drag start. So I'm going to get rid of this, and I want to add the class name of hold when we start to drag, and that hold class will put that border on the fill div, or the div that has the background image. Now we can use the this keyword, which is going to pertain to whichever element that the event's fired on. In this case, it's going to be fill, which is the div with the background image. So I want to take that specific element and I want to add class name. Now this dot class name will just set the class. I could set it equal to something which would replace any other class that's already there, but I actually don't want to replace, I want to append. So I'm going to say plus equals and then add space hold. Okay, so it's going to still have the fill class, but it will also have the hold class. So now let's go ahead and drag this and hold, and you can see the border, see the gray border around the picture. It's kind of faint because of the picture, but it's on this one and it's on the one that's still there. Now another thing I want to do is when I pull it off the box, I want this box to go white. So we want to do that by getting rid of the fill class on that. So let's say this dot class name, and We could set it to nothing, but I'm going to set it to a class of invisible. This class doesn't do anything. There's no styling for it, but it'll get rid of the hold class. So if I open up my tools down here, so you can see it has a class of fill. Now as soon as I click, it goes to invisible. It doesn't even give me time to drag it and to add the class of hold. So what we'll do is add a set timeout, which just sets a timeout for something to happen, for a function to run. So we want to add in a function here, arrow function, and whoops, I want this to run in here, and I don't even have to put a time. I can just put 0 here, and that's enough for this to happen first, so that it just doesn't disappear when I click on it. So now if I save, I'll go ahead and click and hold, and I'm able to pull it out, and then this goes white. Okay, so we have that done. Now when I drop, it's still gone because it has the class of invisible. So we also have drag end on the fill element. So if we go down, actually drag end is right here. We want to then re-add the class name of fill. So let's say this dot class name and just set that to fill. Because right now we're only dealing with the one we're clicking and dragging. We're only dealing with this. Okay, because both of those have drag start and drag end. So right now, if I pull it off, you'll see this goes white. I'm able to add the hold class. When I let go, it goes back to the same place because this specific element still has the fill, right? This isn't being added anywhere else. What we want to happen is when we drop on one of these boxes, we want this div to go in whichever one we drop. So let me just close the CSS. So what we'll do is go down to drag drop, and let's get rid of this. And I want to say this dot class name, set that to empty. We always want to make sure that it has a class of empty right before we drop, or when we drop. But then we also want to add the class, or not the class, but the element of fill inside of whichever one we drop on, and we do that with the append method. So I can say this, meaning the class of empty, the div with the class of empty, and then I want to append into that the fill element. Now if I save this and I try to drop it here, you'll notice it's not working. And the reason for that, I'm just going to bring this browser window over for a second. So both the drag over and the drag enter events have a default action. You can see drag over resets the current drag operation to none, which we don't want to happen. Drag enter will reject the immediate user selection as the potential target element. So we don't want either of those to happen. So all we have to do is for drag over and drag enter is pass in our event objects and call e.prevent default. That'll stop the default behavior of these two events. Just like if you submit a form and you don't want to actually submit it. Oops, what am I doing? You don't want to actually submit it to the page. You want to, use JavaScript. You would prevent the default behavior. So now, let's go ahead and try it. So I'll just go down here and let go, and notice I'm able to now drop it wherever I want. Okay, so that's the drag and drop functionality. But I also want to have an effect when I hover over these as well to make the box I'm hovering over darker. So on drag enter, after we prevent the default, we're going to take that element and we want to append the class name. So plus, want to do plus equals, and we want to add the class of hovered. So now if I take this, you can see every time I enter, it adds that class. So we actually want to clear that when we leave. So on drag leave, we'll just go ahead and set the class name. We'll set it equals. We don't want to append. We just want to basically reset it. So we'll set it to empty again. So now if I go over here and I enter, it gets that dark background. That's the class of hover, also the dash border. But when I leave, it goes back to empty. Okay, so whatever I hover over, we get that effect, and then I can drop it. All right, so I mean that's pretty much the basics of drag and drop with HTML5 and JavaScript. So I mean, you can be more creative with this, and you can create games and really cool interfaces, but this should give you an idea of just how to, how to add these different events and do certain things when they fire off. So that's it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next project.